Alrighty, so today I've got a fun one for you. I'm going to be talking about the best leaders in Star Wars Unlimited, going to be breaking them down set by set, and just kind of go a little outside of just the current metagame. This is going to be a global look at all the leaders. I haven't done something like this, at least not for a very long time, and with 5 sets out, I think it's a good time to kind of reevaluate what I think about all the leaders in the game and how I think they stack up, and also look a little towards the future for them. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button, and if you are interested in some more content from me, do check out my Patreon as well. Alright, so what am I going to do? Simple. Going to cover what I think are the best leaders in each set. So we will start with Spark of Rebellion and go forward. The idea here is to talk about their power level more in a vacuum, not so much in the context of specifically the Legends of the Force metagame. So you are likely going to see some leaders here that don't get a lot of play currently, and you might actually not see some that are getting play, because this isn't really about where I think they stack up right now against the best decks. It's where I think they kind of rank in terms of how good their true potential is, how powerful their floor is, how powerful their ceiling is, and also a big part of this will also be talking about where I think they can improve in the future. Now, we are getting one more set before rotation, set 6. So, we might not see huge changes in how good some of these leaders are there, but I think there's a good chunk of them that might be true all-stars in the Eternal format once that kind of unlocks, once we have a lot more sets, because there's certainly some leaders here that I think will benefit from a larger card pool more than others. But let's dive right into it, go into Spark of Rebellion. So I've picked out 5 leaders from Spark of Rebellion that I think kind of are a step above the rest in terms of their power in a vacuum. Now, to no one's surprise, Boba Fett is on this list. Now, he is suspended in Premiere. He is unlikely to be unsuspended, but he's not suspended in the Trilogy format. Now, the Trilogy format is not a competitive format. There are no competitive events for it, but it is a format that you are allowed to play him in, and there's a good shot that when Eternal format is announced with once set 7 comes out, that he will not actually be on an initial suspension list. Now, whether or not I think that's correct doesn't really matter. I think he probably should be on a suspended list to launch a new format, but he might not be, and it doesn't really matter. We can kind of evaluate him now and just talk about what the deal is, but essentially this one's probably the easiest to cover. His stats are absurd for 5 cost, way too good. This was a mistake through and through on how he was released. He is way better than basically every leader in the game on a flat power, in a power vacuum. On top of that, he also has a very good ability that kind of works incredibly well with some of the best tempo cards in yellow, like Waylay, for instance, and also works with one of the best mechanics in the game, which is Ambush. So, yeah, he's crazy. If he gets unlocked in Eternal, I suspect he will be towards the top of a tier list from the start, and he is kind of an example of where numbers can sometimes just go wrong, because there's nothing inherently broken about him as an ability. It's a pretty interesting ability, but we are talking about a 5 deployed leader that flips with 11 stats. And he also, incidentally, was also given 2 very powerful support cards that only he could use. Now, Fett's Fire Spray has kind of moved out of the format, but probably would still be played if this Boba was meta. And then, of course, his armor, Boba's armor, which is crazy powerful. One of the most difficult cards to interact with in the game. So, Boba, yeah, we can go to the next. And the next is Han. And I think Han, his ability, flat out, is pushed, right? We're talking about ramp. Now, there's going to be some other rampy style leaders later. It's a very powerful mechanic to have built into a leader. I mean, even Boba has that ability to an extent, right? Free resource generation. Now, Han is not played right now. He's essentially absent from the Legends of the Force metagame because it is a force throw style meta, and he suffers from that way more than basically any leader in the game. But it doesn't mean that his leader isn't good anymore. It's just not working in the current metagame. But a leader that can flip on 5 and generate a double resource advantage that turn. It's one of the most powerful turns you can enable in the game. Of course, his old synergy with DJ was completely busted. Whether or not that would be unsuspended or on an initial suspension list with Eternal remains to be seen as well. But if it's not, once again, I expect you'll see some DJ in Han again. So yeah, like, I think whenever you see new leaders, you should pay close attention to those that let you cheat resource mechanics in the game. They're not all good, but they're all worth at least exploring because it is a very powerful mechanic. He does it basically like the freest of all. Now, costing a card is a real thing, and it's certainly a real thing when people are discarding tons of cards from your deck, from your hand. It's also a very real thing when people can one-shot your leader for 1 resource, right? Because his main power play is that flip turn where he can generate a double resource advantage. Those turns are often very difficult for a lot of decks to overcome, and that's kind of why he's not top of the meta right now. But no doubt that this guy can return at any moment, and certainly could be a force in Eternal. Yeah. Next, we got Iden, and this is one that maybe you're surprised I would include here, but no leader does what she does better. And what she does is stall. She, in a sense, you can look at her leader ability as like, my base has plus 10 life. Something like that, right? It's not always 10, but it's an approximation, and that's huge. For any control deck, she has kind of the anti-Sabine ability, and we'll talk about that when we get to Sabine, who's next on this list. But that's a very powerful mechanic for a control deck. There's nothing particularly special about this leader as a unit. It's fine. A 4/4 shielded can trade with something, often generate a little more healing when she comes out. But it really is just about, my base has a lot more life, right? And we see her paired now with like Data Vault. We're talking about some base, like a base combo where sometimes you need to do like 45 damage to this leader to win. And that is something not every deck can do effectively. And this, I think, will always be kind of in the running for the best version of like a hard control leader, because you're just getting this giant built-in insulation from any aggression. All right, next we got Sabine and Palp, and I'm going to mention them together for a second before I kind of cover Sabine more in detail. But these are, for me, the polar extremes of this game. I don't think we will see a 4-cost leader as generically powerful as Sabine, and I don't think we will see an 8-cost leader as generically powerful as Palpatine. They are just like the ultimate versions of aggro or like end game power, right? So in Sabine's case, it's kind of opposite Iden, right? You have an aggro leader whose ability says, my opponent's base starts with 5 less life or 5 less health, right? Something like that. You know, sometimes it's less when you can't ping. Sometimes when you can ping 8 times, and it's like you just had a leader that said your opponent had 8 less life on their base, right? That's crazy powerful, and there's no synergy required around Sabine. Additionally, around Sabine's leader ability. And additionally, you also have the best statted version of a 4-cost leader. She is essentially a 3/5 when she is attacking. So she got push stats and an ability that just like says, this is aggro, this is what I'm doing. Sabine herself doesn't really require much of a build around. Like, yes, she has the rebel trait. You can throw like Fleet Lieutenant and Wing Leader in your Sabine deck. They're usually cards that are in the deck, but this isn't like a tribal synergy deck. Even like Darksaber, the only, like, yes, it's not like a Mandalorian synergy. It's just like you can play it with her because she flips on 4 and you play a 4, right? Like, even though you can play her in non-green decks, it's like the green Sabine was the one you were playing it with anyway, so the card's green. most of the synergy on that was incredibly incidental. Sometimes you got like an experience randomly, but this is not a synergy deck. It's just the best aggro deck because it has the best leader ability and the best stats on a leader, right? And I don't expect that this is not going to be a trend that continues, because we've seen basically since Sabine, every 4-cause leader has been a true build around leader. And they've all essentially been worse than Sabine. But Sabine's going to be gone in like 6 months. So we're going to have to see how new aggro takes hold when it can't just like default to pure power and has to actually work around a deck mechanic more. And in contrast, we've got Palpatine here, and he's never been a true meta dominant leader, and he may never be, because 8 is a ton, and as long as like good aggressive decks exist, it's going to be sometimes difficult to play Palp. But there's no question that he is insanely powerful in a vacuum. There's always room that he could spike something, because there's nothing that goes over this. This is the most powerful flip ability in the game, stealing a unit. He has a built-in draw engine as well. So once again, it's not much of a synergy leader. It's just power, right? Power for a like top mid-range / control style deck. You've got your like built-in win condition on your leader, sort of, right, with this incredibly powerful flip, and you have this built-in draw engine, which is something control decks or like big mid-range decks need. So nothing particularly, like, you don't need to build much around this. You need ramp. That's like kind of the build around with Palpatine, but the rest is you fill it out with ways to survive. And I don't think we'll see probably a leader with this kind of pure power at the top end that is kind of non-synergy related. We do see some other big leaders in this game, but they have a little more constraints around them. They require a little more like deck building consideration specifically tied to the leader. Whereas a Palpatine, it's not like, yeah, you can say you include more fodder units, but sort of like there's not a ton of fodder units that you generally include in these decks. You're just trying to survive. And I think Palp is one of the best leaders in the game. It's actually probably a pretty good thing that we've had very good aggro decks to date, because I think if the meta was like shifted so much towards mid-range that this leader was like kind of positioned more appropriately and didn't have to worry so much about aggression and like disruption, it could be incredibly difficult to ever overcome it, because there is so much pure power to Palpatine, and he's just kind of held in check by the other end of the spectrum right now. All right, next up we got Shadows. Kira is the first one I'll put here. One of the premier event style leaders in the game. We don't really play Kira, for her leader unit. We treat it as like a removal event that synergizes incredibly well with some cards like Overwhelming Barrage and Devastating Gunship. Her shield ability is it's a good ability. It's not like what breaks this leader, right? But this was one of the earliest leaders, especially at her cost curve, to have such a potent flip effect, right? You don't see these kinds of flip effects on cheap leaders most of the time. And Kira, I think that flip effect, that stays good with time. The only thing that kind of holds Kira back, and she's being held back right now, is when there are too many decks that can too easily block value off of her flip. And right now the biggest one is the leader that's right below her, which is the Han Solo leader, which can deploy powerful 4-power units before she even flips. And then of course the difficulty maneuvering Force Throw in this meta when it's online from turn 1 in a lot of decks is very challenging for Kira deck, because a lot of the focus around Kira has always been to gain advantage off the flip, but if the flip doesn't work out, not great. But similarly to like the Han leader we talked about from the Spark section, doesn't mean it stays like that forever. Kira's ability, still one of the best flip abilities in the game. She is in a very powerful control color that can pair incredibly well with one of the best events in the game, which is Overwhelming Barrage. There's going to be more added synergy. Little shout out to the next set. We've already seen a few cards, one of them the Cad Bane unit that is going to be released in the next set. Go check it out. It's kind of like Devastating Gunship, except you can play it from your resource row. Very interesting card with Kira, so keep tabs on that if you're a Kira enjoyer. But I think this is just a very good leader. It's kind of like an event, and it's a fun way to kind of play around mid-range and control. Rey is another one I'll include here. I think the reason she'll kind of stay sturdy is just because, you know, her ability synergizes very well with a lot of units. And it's not like the devs are going to stop creating 1 and 2 power units. So going into the future, we may see even more powerful synergies, more good 1-drops to play with Rey. And even though her stats, you know, when I first saw them, I was unimpressed. It turns out it kind of works in her shell. She's able to churn enough actions usually to get out there and make that hit. Restore 3 on a leader is insane. Like, Restore 3 in general on anything is so much heal that she just ended up being like a pretty sturdy mid-range leader that fixed a lot of issues that blue heroism had, which is poor early units, right? Her ability unlocked a lot of potential for a lot of units that otherwise weren't very good, right? You can play an R2 turn 1 that's a 2/5. There's no, until Gunji came out, there was no such thing as a 2/5 you could play on turn 1, but Rey could do it. And, you know, of course, there's a lot of other units she could buff. So it's a very good ability that I kind of underrated at first, and I expect it to continue to be better as more cards get released. Han here, just like the other Han, it's a resource cheating ability. This one is almost as free as like Han's ability, and the only thing that's not free about it is the fact that it's only units, right? The other Han can cheat out events, like Ewing being a really great one, and like DJ from the resource row, which is not something you could do with this Han. But, you know, it's crazy to be able to play units every turn ahead of curve. And, you know, I think this leader has already gotten a lot better than he used to be, right? Because critical mass at a certain point is that you have so many units that don't care about 2 damage because so much of their effect is front loaded. So think powerful when played effects. That's usually the best thing to do with this, because you're getting front loaded so much value, and the stats on the unit are the less important. And, you know, we have things like Kiadi Mundi, Mace Windu from the most recent set being 2 incredibly notable when played effects that are really pushed with this, right? From earlier sets, you can think of something like Luke, right? That Luke for 6 resources, crazy powerful. Crate Dragon for 8 resources, right? Who cares about that 2 health? So what's going to happen with this leader? Oh boy, every set is going to make this leader better, no doubt. Legend of the Force has made this leader better than he's ever been, but it's never going to stop there, right? You're going to get to a point where every unit in the deck is kind of this push when played effect, and you're just kind of free rolling his ability all game. And his weakest part, the thing that kind of makes him not like completely cracked, is actually just like his unit ability. Like, he's not very good when you flip him. In fact, that ability, it's just the same except you can repeat it. So that's only ever really been something you use with like a weenie aggro style Han version, and there are ways to play that too, usually with green, but he is a little underwhelming as just like a 3/6 that doesn't do much crazy stuff when he's out there. But his ability, one of the best in the game as a leader. He doesn't need to be out there as a unit very much. In fact, it's okay to just trade him off as quickly as possible so you can just safely use his ability from the leader zone. And he will continue to get better into Eternal. It's definitely a leader to kind of keep your eye on. And the last one from this list is Cad Bane. And he's probably like the fringiest one on this list because he is simply a tribal leader. It just seems that Underworld is one of the best supported tribes in the game, and somehow I don't think that's going to change. So he has stats worthy of a 6 flip. Very few leaders in this game actually have stats worthy of a 6 flip, but Cad Bane does. And it works. He has a good ability. The Underworld trait and is one of the best traits in the game. Like, the units are just very good. So when they all also deal damage when you play them, they become even better, right? They have one of the best 2-drops in the game, Aura Singh. They have one of the best 3-drops in the game, Boba Fett. They have Forlom and Zuckuss, right? There's infinite more. It's so easy to fill a deck out for Cad Bane, but every time you see another good Underworld unit, all of a sudden that power level on his deck rises a little bit, and all it's going to take is a few more sets with a few more good Underworld, and we're talking every unit in the deck is going to be above rate, right? Imagine we can just like curve out perfect units all game. We had like 12 different Aura Sing quality units. Well, all of a sudden he becomes crazy good, and he's already very good. So he's never been top tier in my opinion, right below it, especially the last couple sets, but I don't think he's gonna like crater ever, because it looks like a trait that's actively being supported, and he has the stats to back up his power level. All right, so next up we've got Twilight of the Republic. Now, this was certainly the weakest set overall in terms of like power level for the card pool. But the leaders, they were solid. Not the best, not the worst. Although one of them, maybe the best, if not second best, Jango Fett. We'll start here the same way we started with Boba Fett. This is another leader that currently I don't expect will be suspended with the launch of Premier Eternal in about 6-ish months. Maybe he should be pre-suspended. The leaderability is very difficult to navigate from the other side. It is one of the straight up most powerful leader abilities we've seen to date. This entire game functions around unit-based combat, right? So Jango Fett's ability to take that away from your opponent is very, very pushed. Kind of an unseen power in this ability is the fact that it also takes away action capability from your opponent. So what ends up happening is you force your opponent to take actions because you are stealing some from them by exhausting their units. So really kind of like squashes their turn a little bit. He's very well statted, and the real kicker here is when he flips, there's no cap on his ability, and that wasn't a huge problem when he was released because there were no cards in the game that could deal damage to multiple units with one action unless you like comboed it with some exploit mechanic or something. But with the launch of Jump to Lightspeed, they printed 3 between IG 2000, War Juggernaut, and Devastator. It completely pushed this leader into unfair territory. Has probably been the worst meta game, at least in a lot of people's minds to date. That like first month-ish of Jump to Lightspeed meta. It was very telegraphed what was going to happen. This is actually one of the few cases where I thought action should have been taken before the set even came out. It was just too obvious that this was going to completely break the game. It did completely break the game, and he is gone, and that's for good. That's for the better, I should say. It might not be for good. We'll see what ends up happening with him in Eternal, but with the cards that exist already in the pool, I see no reason why he wouldn't immediately catapult into like the top of a tier list. Him and, you know, the other Fett, Boba, like father, like son. These are some of the most powerful leaders in the game. This at least does require a build around. The problem is it's just too free to build around it with such powerful cards. So keep an eye on here, and like certainly in Trilogy, you can play it right now. I assume the best decks involve some combination of Jango and Boba, maybe the Han with DJ, but these are all things that have been suspended for a reason. Right now, the card pool isn't large enough to support like getting it unsuspended. And I don't know how big a card pool will be required before these leaders like Django and Boba will actually end up being balanced, because they will continue to get better with a larger card pool too. So yeah, that's my Django spiel. Kind of a menace. The rest of these a little more tame, but Quinlan, a very good leader, kind of hard carried by the fact that he's just a very powerful deploy, being a 3/7 stat line. That is kind of the magic stat line, and which is funny because there was a 4/7 in set 1, but he also has that force trait. He's built into a good color that when it pairs with force throw, like yellow paired with force throw, you get mass discard capabilities, and that's always been kind of the thing with Quinlan ever since he was released in Twilight. That's been the thing to do: pair him with red to get force throw, play other disruptive effects, and capitalize on the fact that he's just a very well statted leader that can take advantage of early boards with his ping ability. And that's probably not going away. He might not be one that will like become crazy better like with more cards released. I think there is kind of like a very high power floor here, but maybe not quite as high of a power ceiling as some other leaders, just because like his leader ability itself is good, specifically because of Tarkin Town. But outside of that interaction, its main use cases are always about what thresholds you can break with ambush, and like one of the key ones has always been like Plo Koon, but there are others like Han, of course, being able to kill 7 health, 7 cost units without taking damage back. It's things like that. But outside of like breakpoints with ambush and the Tarkin Town interaction, the ability itself isn't like crazy good, and it doesn't really get much better with more cards released. So like I said, the power floor very, very high for Quinlan. It's a very good leader. We'll see kind of what's on the horizon for Quinlan in the future. I also want to include Anakin on this list, and I've never been like a true believer of this leader in general. I think he's powerful. I think he's always been slightly overrated, actually, but I'm still including him as like one of the best leaders in the game. He does something very unique. For a 6-cost leader, he has crazy stats, right? He often flips as like a 7/7, right? These are kind of like unheard numbers when you're comparing him to most 6-flip leaders. So he's got that part of the game covered, and I think his ability, although so much better when you have initiative, does have room to grow in the future as they release more cheap units that create effective trades, whether it's like shielded units or high health units. Any sort of combination there, his leader ability gets better, right? And if there are ways to game initiative in the future, that's also something that you can look for with him. I don't expect we'll see something like that, but he can't get much worse because his flip will always be such a devastating thing against a lot of decks. And I don't think we're going to see like a 6-flip leader that's going to be able to like take over a game in 2 attacks quite the same way, outside of pilot leaders who kind of do a similar thing where they just flip onto another unit, create giant power units that can try to close the game very quickly. And that's been his thing basically since the start, and I think will continue to be a pretty powerful game plan in the future. Next up, I'm going to put Chancellor Palpatine, and this one might be the most surprising on the list. He's obviously not been a particularly great leader to date. He's won like some smaller tournaments, like maybe a PQ here and there, but certainly not been like a meta breaking leader. And I think it might take some time for that to happen, but this is one I will certainly keep an eye on for Eternal because it's incredibly unique what he does. He is a built-in leader with card advantage and unit generation, right? So the more times you can flip this, the more value you get versus some other leaders who are very static in how powerful their effects are. Where some leaders, they flip, they die, you're kind of out of value. the longer the game goes on, the more value this guy generates. So that's something that is always enticing. And of course, the other enticing part here is you get to kind of free roll 2 alignments and 2 aspects, right? So usually this leader's been paired with blue, but whatever it may be, you get to play the hero cards and the villain cards. So as more and more cards come out, the card quality on this deck increases twice as much as it does for any other deck because you have access to 2 full card pools. And if we start seeing specific cards, right, this is one that it's going to take some very specific releases, mainly in the early game, ways to more easily control his flip, because that's his biggest weakness is we don't have that many ways to self-control. There is a little bit of exploit in the game, but what we need are better units that do things when they die, better statted units that can compete in the early game on the board while also forcing trades, better like villain hero ratios with our cost curve, right? It's a little vague, I'm completely aware, but if you've played this leader in a lot, which I have, you do notice a pretty high like clunk rate to it, especially when your opponent kind of knows how to interact with it, how they're supposed to when they're supposed to be defeating your units to kind of like make your flips more awkward, when to go to space, when to go to the ground, whatever it may be. But there's gonna be more cards eventually, like for this guy to like work on his early curve specifically. More ways to prolong games to get more value out of his flip, right? So while this game is very leader centric and the biggest power play this game has is the turn you flip your leader, right? You get a free unit that's heavily statted for the turn it's flipped on, and you're giving that up, but you're getting a lot for it. And we've seen like this be a good way to get the new Anakin legendary involved, one of the most powerful units. If we see more units like that, certainly it helps this Chancellor more than it helps most other decks because he doesn't have to go out of his way to splash. So, you know, I think there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of power built in here. It's not a leader that would make like a top tier list right now for me, but I definitely want to include him on like what I think are some of the best leaders in the game, or the ones that have some of the best potential. And the last one here is Yoda, and this isn't like quite on the Palp level of extreme power. Well, I should specify the Palp, the Spark Palp, the first Palp, the 8-cost Palp, but it is kind of the like ultimate hero version of that. It's got a very powerful flip. And you know, it's not card draw, but it's card filtering, right? So similar to Palp, just kind of both halves are a little worse, but you do get it earlier. And Yoda's the kind of leader that I think can also get better with time, and he's decent right now. I don't think he's top tier right now, but there will come a time maybe where there are enough ways to kind of mitigate early game damage, fight for the board earlier, and you be able to like more easily utilize his unfair stuff, right? And there are some unfair stuff already for Yoda, right? The Ray unit that lets you free roll damage on, and there's also You're My Only Hope. So we might see even more ways that the top of the deck, that manipulation of the top of the deck comes at a advantage to the Yoda player. So you've got this like built-in like win condition sort of. It's not quite as built in as it is with Palp. It's not as good of a flip ability, but it is kind of a board dominating flip effect, with also a leader ability that gets to like break some interactions in the game by stacking the top of its deck. So another one that I think can grow in power over time, has already kind of shown up in the meta in like some ways, right? Not as like a tier 1 force, but has made a mark so far. So we'll keep tabs on Yoda. All right. Now we are up to jump to light speed, and we got the top 3 there, pilots, and let's get to it. So Luke Skywalker is the first one I'll talk about. Again, currently not a top meta performer, but a decent deck. But this is one I'm very much keeping my eye on for the future, especially once rotation happens. I think right now he competes a lot with like other aggro based decks, and the pilot stuff is kind of easy to interact with when Bamboozle exists, for instance, right? Now, he has built insulation from upgrade removal, which separates him from the rest of the pilots, but Bamboozle still hits really, really hard here. And there's also, although I think you can make a good Luke deck right now, there's also certainly gonna come more fighters, right? We're gonna see more good fighters and maybe crazy good fighters, right? And it's a trait that has already been fairly supported. I mean, fighter is so generic that we are just going to see a lot more. And as long as you can build up that curve in your deck and it continues to get better and better, this leader will continue to get better and better. And maybe if the game slows down just a tad, this can become one of the premium aggro decks in the game because it's such a devastating flip. It is a very powerful flip effect to be able to like come down, be insulated completely from upgrade removal, right? So once Bamboozle is gone, the things that interact with this are going to be like Power of the Dark Side and Rivals Fall. And, you're going to have to find ways to beat like villain blue decks outside of relying necessarily on that devastating flip. But not a lot else is going to be able to interact with it. And yeah, so between that and fighters being released, I think we got a bright future for the Luke pilot. And Darth Vader, it's another one. Not a lot different to say than Luke. It's already been a top performer in the meta, so he has been a little less reliant on taking over the game on his flip because his leader ability is kind of overwhelming sometimes. Darth Vader, much more than Luke, is like kind of a gut check sometimes. If you can't interact with him in the first couple turns, you just can completely overrun. And being in villain also gives you access to things like Lurking TIE Phantom, which is like a cheese out card. You, of course, are in the color for Overwhelming Barrage if you're running that. And, he has built in, although he doesn't have upgrade protection the way Luke does, he has like built-in protection from Power of the Dark Side when he flips because he makes tokens. But the key here is that his ability, he is one of the more powerful leader abilities in the game, just creating units. Not something we've seen for free outside of Darth Vader. And I think Luke, has more ways to get better over time than Darth Vader specifically. But Darth Vader has a much like higher floor. It's just he asks a question of your opponent much quicker than Luke does because games can really snowball with a Darth Vader deck. And I do think he's one of the best leaders in jump to light speed. And I think he will be a good aggro deck moving forward. And the last pilot I wanted to include here is Kazuda. Now, I didn't include... Another one I almost included was actually Boba Fett, but unfortunately, I just don't see indirect damage getting that much support moving forward. So I think his ceiling's kind of capped in a lot of ways. Whereas Kazuda, we talked about Sabine early, where it's just like generic power on a 4. And this is not. This requires a build around. And that is more interesting to me, but this build around is quite powerful, and we're going to see even more units that benefit from this, right? But there's already a lot, and some really good ones. We talk about like Stolen AT Hauler, Fireball, Millennium Falcon. There's in other colors as well. In red, you get to remove downsides of Heroic Sacrifice and Trench Run. In blue, you have things like Ogdo Bogdo and the 3/5 ship. There's just a lot going on for Kazuda, and we're probably going to get more. And similar to what I mentioned with Luke, with Bamboozle going away, these pilots are going to become a lot more deadly versus a lot of decks that currently can kind of hold them down. And we might even see upgrade removal when that rotate, like Confiscate. Are we going to get that back? If not, all of a sudden upgrade removal is also going to be more expensive. So I think pilots as a general have a brighter future, but Kazuda, I think, has a lot of chance to be one of the best aggro decks, especially once rotation happens and like Sabine goes away, because his ability is going to scale well. He is statted well, right? Even on the ground, he's 2/5, but him and Vonreg both have that +3/+3. It's just Kazuda's so much better than Vonreg because the ability's so much better. And we're going to get even more cards that might benefit from this effect. And yeah, so I think Kazuda, another pretty exciting one for the future. And the last two for Jump to Lightspeed to talk about are not pilots, but Admiral Piet. This might be the quickest one I'll talk about. Resource cheating. That's good. More capital ships will probably be released. That's good. Piet is not a top tier leader, and he is certainly one of the most like telegraphed linear decks you can make. They're like kind of everything is on rails when you play Piet. You're like ramp, and then you play ship into ship into ship, and maybe one of those turns is like a board clear, like a barrage or a turbo laser, whatever it may be. But that strategy is pretty good, and it's gonna get better because capital ships are gonna get better. We might see more curve filling capital ships. Anyone that you can play on turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, like especially ones that maybe are powerful when you don't ramp. So like a 5 cost that you can play on 4R. Right now, we kind of resort to like mediocre units in that spot, but maybe they'll be better. Maybe they'll be even better 7 cost ships for his flip turn, which is kind of a weak spot in the curve. Actually, we often play like a 6 and then try to get to like 8. But anywhere in the curve that you see capital ships that are incredibly powerful, it's going to beef up this deck. It's going to make it more consistent. You're going to keep resource cheating, and it may be a linear deck, but it's already powerful. It's not top tier, but it's certainly one that can get there. And last, Grand Admiral Thrawn, and this is also like this is scaling period, right? I've mentioned scaling with card releases on a lot of leaders, right? Like tribal leaders like Cad and Luke, Piet just now, but when defeated is kind of like a tribal synergy for Grand Admiral Thrawn. And when you look around and you try to build Thrawn right now, you actually notice there aren't that many good ones. And there will be at some point. There are good ones. There'll be better ones moving forward. We'll just keep seeing them come out. And this is a very powerful ability. It's actually kind of surprising that it hasn't been powerful enough to get him to break out. But it really comes down to just not enough redundancy so far for Thrawn, and a little weak spot in his actual deploy, which does nothing, right? He flips. He's like a mediocre statted 6 flip leader. His ability doesn't actually get any better. So in that sense, you don't get a huge power boost from his leader, but the ability, very good. There's a lot of good things that you can do when you can double trigger when defeated effects, and I think there may come a time where there are enough that you can do some really crazy stuff with Thrawn. So certainly one I'm looking forward to exploring in the future. Certainly one I think deserves a spot on the best leaders list, because again, not just because they're not like the best right now doesn't mean in a vacuum that they aren't very, very good. So we are going to wrap this up with Legends of the Force, the most recent set. And this is kind of actually the inverse of Twilight, where in Twilight, the set itself is pretty weak, like very weak. But we have a lot of leaders to pick from. This is actually probably the set with the weakest leader pool to date, in my opinion, at least currently. And part of that might be because so many of the leaders are so focused on the Force mechanic that we end up just like picking the 2 best ones. And they are both on the screen. And even the heroic one, Obi, I thought about not including, to be honest. Let's start with Talzin here. This leader is very, very good because the stats are very good. So this is like similar to what I mentioned with Quinlan. We got a floor here that's very high and a very powerful Force ability. You get to free roll the Force interactions cards, right? Like Force Lightning and Force Throw if you're paired with red. And you just have this very high power floor. Now, I'm not sure the power ceiling here is going to rise that much, because I don't know if we're going to be seeing more Force payoffs, especially like Force token payoffs. We probably will see more cards that say if you have a Force unit, etc., right? But I don't know if we're going to see more ways to utilize the Force token outside of Legends of the Force, which means we may not get a lot of help there. Now, she doesn't need too much help. There might already be enough. A big focus for improvement for Talzin in the future will be just better force units up and down the curve, especially early in the game. You don't need that much in terms of the force token payoff for this leader because she has a way to use the token on her leader ability. With the -1/-1. So you don't need tons of cards that use it. You have a few of the best ones, and like Talzin's Assassin is a really great one. Dooku doesn't even, Darth Tyrannus doesn't even use the effect. So where Talzin's power level grows is just better turn 1 and turn 2 plays that really keep this force train going, and maybe more force payoffs akin to like force throw and force lightning, stuff like that. But there is room for improvement, not as much as like some other leaders. It's much more dependent on the kind of like force units that are released. But because the power floor here is already so high, and it is probably the best leader in this set in a vacuum, maybe Kylo can kind of take that throne, but I think he is much more synergy focused. So yeah, a very good leader, worthy of the spot here. And Obi-Wan, it's a lot of similar stuff to say, right? I think the way this gets better is better early force units. And a big reason why the best heroic force deck is probably Han is because he fixes the main issue that a lot of these decks have, which is the early curve isn't perfect. But that can change with one set release where you get a couple more force units in a color and all of a sudden your curve is kind of fixed. And similarly to Talzin, he has a way to utilize this force token, so you don't need more releases of like force token users. You can just play the best ones that already exist. A lot of them are in red, but blue has a lot of really good ones too, and even yellow can be a really aggressive combination with Obi-Wan. So while I did hesitate to include him here, I do think there's room for this leader to kind of overtake a lot of others, especially once rotation happens and if he gets more early game help in the force unit department, because, you know, it's a powerful ability, right? Rey was on this list and it costs 1 to give an experience with Rey, and it costs 0 to do it with Obi-Wan, and he flips a turn earlier and has a very similar ability to her as well. So like there's a lot to like here, and there's a lot of like breakpoints that you can reach with these experience early in the game to really press your opponent. And I wish he had that 7th health. He doesn't. Talzin does. But there's a lot of good stuff with Obi-Wan, and we'll see what happens with him in the future. And the last leader we'll talk about, and kind of the most exciting-ish one of Legends of the Force, is Kylo. And this was a pure synergy leader, and I put him in like a maybe tier to start, along with some other synergy leaders like Avar and Barriss. This one was going to take some time to kind of figure out for sure, and he was figured out. And there's a couple very good versions of this deck, whether or not it's the Kylo Tarkatown deck that had a breakout in Galactics, or the Kylo Green split between Data Vault and ECL. He's proven that he can hang, and he's the kind of leader that was either going to hang or it was just going to be way too slow. And, you know, turns out it's good enough, and he does really cool things. This is a very interesting interaction. He creates a very powerful flip turn out of cards in your discard pile, and, you know, you get to free roll one of the best new units in the game with Anakin, and that's not going away anytime soon. And, you know, more upgrades come out that create more combinations of powerful flip effects, flip turn effects, I should say. Is just going to increase the power level here, because we already know that the power level is good enough to be competitive in the current scene, and he's going to last post rotation. And of course, a bunch of upgrades will rotate out at that point, but we'll get new ones as well. And, you know, he came out with craving power. That's not going anywhere. That's going to be tied to him with green kind of forever. And yeah, like you get this free filtering ability, which is powerful. You get ways to enable Anakin. Maybe in the future we get more cards like that trigger off of cards in your discard pile, whatever it may be. We could see really powerful combinations. Even something like Palp Return works well. Even Look, you don't get to draw a card when you discard a unit, but sometimes cheating 2 resources is worth that price. And so there's like a lot of ways that this ability can scale in the future. And because it's already started off at being a very powerful leader, I expect good things for the future with Kylo. And it's nice to see that we didn't just get like a generic power level leader pop off, right? Because Talzin is just that. It's just a generically powerful leader. It does good things. It has good stats, but Kylo is a pure build around leader, and we haven't seen many of these really take off. So it's cool that he did, and I think he'll be here to stay in the future as well. Certainly could get a big boost actually once rotation happens, and the power of a lot of other leaders might decrease. And as long as we have the right upgrades for this guy, he might not get any worse with that. All right, that's what I got. Those are the 5 sets. Those are the leaders that I think are the best in the game in a vacuum. Hope you enjoyed hearing some insight about that, some thoughts about where these leaders might go post-rotation. Let me know if there's any leaders you think I missed. Let me know if there's any leaders that you think I included that don't deserve a spot. Whatever it is, let me know. And until next time, take care.